Welcome back, everyone. Let's switch gears now and speak about some policy governance matters. President Muhammadu Buhari last year signed the 2022 budget into law, but he raised an eyebrow on some of the additions made to or some of the adjustments made to the budget. The president had expressed strong reservations on what he termed worrisome changes made by the National Assembly to the budget estimate. He lamented the reduction in the provisions for many strategic capital projects to introduce empowerment projects. Some members of the National Assembly, as reported by the Punch newspapers, are alleging that only the leadership of the two chambers and members of the respective appropriation committees were beneficiaries of such additions or adjustments. The president is taking the National Assembly up on reducing provisions for about 10,733 projects and introducing 6,576 new projects, which increased the budget from 16.39 trillion by a total sum of 735 billion naira, and the budget now volume stands at 17.13 trillion. That is what you see on your screen and what you get now. 10,733 projects initial one as presented by the executive, but the newly started projects by National Assembly, 6,576 new projects. The difference is 735 billion. The budget was increased by that from 16 trillion to 17 trillion. And so members of the National Assembly are alleging budget padding, and they are accusing members of the Appropriations Committee and leadership of the National Assembly. It is from the National Assembly these accusations are coming from. Don't forget, the last time you heard about budget padding, it was from the National Assembly that whistle was blown. This time around, it's blowing again. So we wanted to look into all of these matters. Some people will tell you, well, adding these things are not illegal, but the question is the moral issues behind it, whether or not it is allowed to do, for them to do that without the consent of the National Assembly, what the law says. These are all the issues. Whether or not, economically speaking, these are also allowed for. And that's why we're going to be digging deeper into this matter. Tonight, we've extended invitation to members of the National Assembly, the spokesperson to members of the Appropriations Committee. But apparently, most of the National Assembly members are out of town. And we hope that they will be able to answer to some of these issues that Nigerians would like to listen to and explanations being given. We have Mr. Rafsanjani, the Executive Director of Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center. He's in Abuja, so thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much.
And virtually, we have an economist. Dr. Muda Yusuf is the Chief Executive Officer of Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise and Economic and Business Advocacy think tank. He's joining us virtually from Lagos. Dr. Yusuf, it's good to see you again, and thank you so much for joining us. I think I should begin from Lagos. Fair enough to begin from Dr. Yusuf. Give us a sense of what you make of the increase. The president had raised this issue first and foremost, even before anybody did. What is your take on the differences that we have seen, Dr. Yusuf? I'm not sure he's able to hear me, but let me bring the same question to Mr. Rafsanjani. What is your take on the president's reservation about the budget, the increment, the additions that the National Assembly members, if truly they introduce about over 6,000 projects, is it legal or is it in the realm of morality?
Thank you very much. I think it is important that we understand the basics foundation on what budget is all about and the legality for even the budget as with respect to National Assembly roles and responsibility. Appropriation or budget bill is just like an act, and therefore if you send a bill to National Assembly from the executive, it is expected that the National Assembly should meticulously, judiciously, with all honesty and national interest at the back of their mind, look at that appropriation bill. to, have a look at it and ensure that they eliminate any corruption, involved in those budgets, including duplication of projects, including, waste, including, things that did not really, have any sense. For example, project that you're going to do, which is supposed to have like a 5-year or 10 years, duration, and suddenly you just bring in that project and appropriate money, which did not have any, plan or backup for, multiple years, progression in terms of allocation of money. So National Assembly is supposed to work on all those things and ensure that whatever appropriation they are eventually passing is in the best interest of Nigeria. Now, the allegation of budget padding by either the National Assembly members themselves or by the president, which has become a recurrent issue, is just to tell you that obviously something is happening that is not morally, like you said, right. For example, if you bring in a budget that is completely different from what the executive has brought before the National Assembly, introducing new headlines and other things that were not part of the initial budget brought by the executive. In other words, try to completely upturn the budget submitted by the executive and bringing in those items that obviously not in the interest of the nation. You're actually doing budget padding. But if you are looking at different areas where, for example, in the area in the health sector, Nigeria has the commitment of at least budgeting for 15% for Nigeria, in its health. In education, if you also noted that the gap is not really, meeting with the reality, likewise to other sector, if you look at it as a legislator, that the executive is not actually doing those budgeting that will really respond to the yearning and aspiration of Nigerians based on our also income, expected income, National Assembly can actually adjust those things. But introducing entirely new budget heading that does not exist, and that there was no prior conversation with the executive, and that those budget line that you are bringing are your so-called constituency project that you are putting, right. Obviously, so there's a concern on that.
So let us clarify for Nigerians to get. So you've explained the process of appropriations and budgeting. It is for the executive to present to the National Assembly what it wants to implement.
Exactly.
It is a baby of the executive.
Exactly.
But the appropriation process is for the National Assembly to scrutinize.
Exactly.
Do they have the power, the right to introduce new things?
No, actually, if you see, those things could have been done before the formal submission to the National Assembly. And that is why this romancing that the National Assembly leadership is having with the executive has not yielded any positive results. Because if it has, they would have been able to meet before the budget is submitted to the National Assembly to say, okay, these are the things that we think, should be done. In other words, there should be, a pre-budget conversation and understanding between the executive leadership, executive and National Assembly leadership, so that we avoid all this blackmail and rancor.
You know the reason, Mr. Rafsanjani, you know the reason why I'm asking, because you said that if some of the major headings of the budget are not tampered with, there might not be any wrongdoing. But this is what the president said. He has accused the National Assembly of reducing provisions for about 10,000 projects and introducing 6,000 more new projects, which increase the budget by over almost $1 trillion. Now, these are the words of the president. He said, the cut in the provisions for several of these projects by the National Assembly may render the projects unimplementable or set back their completion, especially some of these administration's strategic capital projects. End of quote. That is President Buhari talking there.
I absolutely agree with Mr. President on this, because National Assembly cannot completely upturn the budget submitted by the executive. And that's why I say there should be opportunity of free budget submission, dialogue, and discussion. Everything is about dialogue. And secondly, where it becomes worrisome, like some of the members are accusing the leadership of the National Assembly of cornering this so-called constituency project. And I want to suggest that National Assembly should come clear on this. Let us have a legal framework that spell out how this constituency project should be, since the National Assembly members are desperate to see that they carry out projects for their constituency. But we cannot be putting billions of naira in the so-called empowerment that goes to individual credit. Most of these projects that you hear constituency project, especially the one that they call empowerment, I think that eventually they turn them into campaign. So you use public taxpayers' money to be running your own personal campaign. This is not ethical and this is not proper. And therefore, I agree with the president that some of those new budget headings that have been introduced should not be the case, because it will distort the principle of what the budget is
some people will argue that this is a culture and nothing has changed.
A culture does not encourage impunity.
So as far as you're concerned, from the National Assembly point of view, their action is impunity, isn't it?
Yeah, well, because if you continue to take money, public taxpayers' money, and personalizing the taxpayers' money, no monitoring on how this money or this so-called project are spent, sometimes duplication. For example, members want to do primary health care, they do not discuss with the Ministry of Health to know whether there are such kind of project contained in the budget that the executive is sending. That's why I talk about pre-budget discussion, dialogue.
Let's bring in Dr. Yusuf into the conversation. It's not the first time you probably are engaging in this kind of conversation, Dr. Yusuf. Are you surprised this time around that members of the National Assembly are the ones blowing the whistle about what they have now tagged budget padding on the 2022 budget?
Well, I'm not surprised, but I think we need to look at these issues very, very dispassionately. There are a number of perspectives that I like us to look at. One is the constitutionality of the whole idea of either bringing in new projects or reducing amount of allocation. How constitutional is that act, especially within the context of Section 80 and 81 of the Constitution? Because that section states clearly that no monies should be spent from the Consolidated Revenue Fund unless as appropriated by the National Assembly. That is very clear in the Constitution. The second issue is the appropriateness of what has been done. Is it really appropriate to introduce so many projects and to tamper with so many projects that have been proposed? So we cannot interrogate the proprieteness or the appropriateness of that action. The third issue is the quality of engagement between the executive and the legislature. Obviously, the quality of engagement is not as much as we expect. If there is this big gap between what is being proposed and what is being approved by the National Assembly. Then finally, is the issue of the capacity of the National Assembly on issues of appropriation. If you look at the US Parliament, for instance, they have a whole Congressional Budget Office, which has a staff of close to 100, with experts, with economists who can properly analyze the budget and package it properly. I think something like that is also being contemplated by the National Assembly. So there's also the issue of capacity, which creates all sorts of gaps in whatever was approved. But for me, I think there has to be a lot more engagement, but more importantly, is to settle the constitutional question. Where does the buck stops as far as appropriation is concerned? Does this stop at the desk of the president or at the National Assembly? And I think we need to get the judiciary to interpret, especially Section 80 and 81, to let us know whether in the first place, whether it is constitutional for the National Assembly to introduce new projects, whether it is constitutional for them to delete projects, whether it's constitutional for them to amend appropriation or allocations to projects. I think that is the way to settle this matter once and for all. We have been on this for close to 2 decades, perhaps since 1999. Going back and forth, you remember the case of Honorable Abdulmumin Jubri? He has to be suspended from the parliament for 180 legislative days on account of this issue of pardon. So I think these are the very, very fundamental issues. I think somebody should have the courage to step up to the judiciary to ask for proper interpretation and the definition of the limits of the powers of both the executive and the legislature as far as appropriation is concerned.
In terms of financial planning, how hurtful could it be if you make plans? Because this is what a lot of people will suggest, that the executive has, the budget is a baby of the executive, but the role of the National Assembly is to scrutinize and, properly monitor in the manner in which the propositions of the executive, or what it looks like, the shape and color, it comes up. But are you saying that it's not hurtful at all when you make a plan and it's being reviewed or adjusted in the manner in which it has been done this time around?
Yeah, that is why I was talking about the appropriateness of the adjustments that has been done. There's the issue of whether it is appropriate to do it in the manner in which it has been done. There's the issue of whether it is constitutional, whether they have the powers to do so. And in order to manage this kind of situation, just as my colleague said in the studio, if there is proper engagement, we will not see this kind of gaps. But if there is no proper engagement, you continue to see this kind of gaps year in, year out. Of course, it will distort planning because the executive has a lot more capacity in terms of recognizing what needs to be done, how much is available, and all of that. The executive has a lot more capacity. But you have this issue with the Constitution. If the Constitution is vesting the powers of appropriation in the National Assembly, and the National Assembly doesn't have so much capacity to know what should be done, what can be executed, then you have a problem. But the best way to start is to define the limits of the arms.
Let's take a breather, and when we come back, we will wrap up on the way forward. If there are issues of budget padding, how can we ensure that this doesn't happen in the future? And then, of course, how can the National Assembly or the executive ensure that whatever they have on their hands is properly implemented? We take a break, and when we come back, my guest will give us insight into all of this. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're wrapping up now. Let me come back to Abuja studio with Mr. Rafsanjani. Can we say, from the position of the president, that is some kind of budget padding? True or false?
It is true, because some of the budget line or some of the increases, were not actually done in the best interest of Nigerian people. As members of the National Assembly are accusing their principal officers, cornering large chunk of even the constituency project to themselves. I don't think that is appropriate, and I think we need to stop that, because it is not healthy. It is not also helping to improve financial transparency in the country. Again, also it is important that the National Assembly takes their job seriously. We have been proposing and advising the National Assembly to legalize National Assembly Budget and Research Office, NIBRO, to help them with the capacity that can be able to checkmate whatever executive brings as appropriation. But that has not yet happened, and I don't know why they are not able to legislate on that. It is only when you have that you can match capacity with the capacity. Otherwise, as it is now, what you notice is that the National Assembly are more concerned with only constituency project in the budget, looking at other areas like health, education, foreign affairs, defense, and what have you, is not giving much attention, much debate within the National Assembly. But when it comes to issues of allocation for constituency project, it is where you see activism of members of the National Assembly and principal officers. So it is important that if we're going to have constituency project, let us have a legal framework on how that should be done so that we can be able to monitor and be able to spend that money transparently, not people cornering it to personalize
How can we
it for their
stop
campaign.
it?
It is possible. Just have a legal framework on it. Spells how it should be done. As it is now, it is blind and it's just money for people just to use for their campaign and sometimes misappropriated it. And that's why you see EFCC and the ICPC are chasing them with their contractors. So in order to stop this embarrassment, to the National Assembly, let them, have a legal framework so that Nigerians, since the National Assembly members, they want to see something they do to their constituency. So let us have something that can guide it, something that will make them to do it in more transparent, more inclusive, more participatory way.
All right. Let me ask Dr. Yusuf, in closing now, in terms of financial plans for these administration, the monies are not even there. We have the what is being earmarked for debt repayment is huge. And so it's meager resources that you need to execute carefully. Now, the president has raised the issue of implementation. What is your advice tonight based on the predicament of the executive in the light of what the National Assembly has done?
Well, I think there will have to be a compromise between the executive and the National Assembly. The National Assembly has a position, the president also has a position. I think what should happen is a compromise. But let me also emphasize that the earlier we're able to determine the constitutional limits of each of the arms of government on appropriation, the better for everybody. Secondly, this situation calls for a lot more dialogue, a lot more engagement between the executive and the legislature. And thirdly, let me say that when you use the word pardon, pardon has a very negative connotation. I don't think it is an appropriate word to use in this context because there is a constitutional confusion as to whether they have the right to do so or not to do so. Because otherwise, why even take the appropriation bill to the assembly, to the parliament in the first place? Why? If they don't have any powers to tamper with anything. The question is, how far can they go in tampering with the appropriation bill? These are the very fundamental issues. And just as my colleague said, we need to deal with the issue of capacity. We need to build capacity in the National Assembly to deal with appropriation issues.
I must sincerely thank both of you for the insights you have shared from the financial and economic point of view and the legal and the advocacy point of view. Thank you so much, Mr. Rafsanjani, ED of CISLAC, and Dr. Muda Yusuf. Thank you so much indeed for your time tonight. I appreciate it. But that's our show for today, everyone. Many thanks for watching. I'm Sean Kimale. Bye-bye.